There are moments when something inside you shifts, and no one sees it. No loud fights, no final goodbyes, no dramatic scenes, just silence. But that silence is exactly where everything changes. Not on the outside, inside. It's when you stop writing that message you've rewritten 1,000 times. It's when you put down the phone, lean back, and realize it's no longer about pride. It's about dignity. It's not a battle to be noticed anymore. It's a need not to lose yourself. The truth, the one most people don't dare to admit, is that the more you pull away from someone who took you for granted, the more they begin to think about you. Not because they suddenly fell in love, not because they finally realized your worth, but because they lost control. And when someone who's used to always having access to you realizes you're truly slipping away, not playing games, but genuinely detaching, something stirs inside them. A crack, a doubt, a fear. But you won't see it at first, because their ego will do everything to hide it. They'll pretend they don't care, pretend they're happy. But deep down, they're starting to feel your absence. It's not magic, it's human psychology. When your presence becomes expected, it loses its impact. But when that presence suddenly vanishes, leaving behind nothing but silence, the mind begins to fill in the gaps with thoughts, with questions, with restlessness. Because silence has a power no words can match. It's like staring at an empty room. The longer you look, the more you notice what's missing. You've felt it before, haven't you? When the other person started fading, when their messages became colder, more distant, when you felt quietly pushed aside with no explanation. You thought, you analyzed, you tried to make sense of it. You felt on your skin the destructive weight of absence. And now it's in your hands, but not for revenge, not for manipulation, for survival. Because there's a limit no one can cross without consequence. The limit between giving and draining. And you, in silence, reached it. You didn't scream. You didn't create drama. You didn't post quotes begging for attention. You just started walking away. Not with rage, but with exhaustion. Not with hatred, but with clarity. You realized that anyone who couldn't choose you when it mattered doesn't deserve you when you rise again. And from that moment, something shifts. Not in them, in you. The thought of that person doesn't hurt like it used to. Their absence is no longer a hole to fill. It's a space to protect. And just when you start to feel peace, when you stop reacting, when you stop chasing, that's when they start to feel your absence. Because detachment creates silence, and silence creates reflection. That's where the true awakening begins. When you finally see that all that pain you felt didn't come from love, it came from attachment, from routine, from the fear of being forgotten. But when you vanish with dignity, when you choose self-respect above everything, that fear begins to fade, and something new is born in its place. Not strength, but peace. Not revenge, but presence. People won't admit it, but they start thinking of you the moment you become unpredictable. When they no longer control your reactions. When your name stops popping up in their notifications and your silence becomes a constant echo in their mind. When your likes disappear, your comments vanish, and your familiar presence goes missing. That's when they start to feel the weight of your distance. But be careful, this is not a game, this is not a trick to make them come back. It's a process to never again become the version of yourself that tolerated being overlooked. Because those who choose silence as healing don't return out of need. They only return if they want to. And many times, they don't. This is the uncomfortable truth. The more you pull away, the more you live rent-free in the mind of the one who forgot your value. Because you're no longer available, you become unreachable. No longer the easy option. You become the echo of a presence that can't be replaced. And they will never admit it. Not out loud, not publicly, but they'll think it, and they'll feel it. And you're just at the beginning, at the start of a journey where you no longer need anyone's validation, where you don't have to prove yourself anymore, where silence is no longer weakness, but authority, where every step back isn't retreat, it's a decision, where your invisibility becomes your greatest power, because the one who knows how to stay silent who can disappear without a sound, who no longer chases, is exactly the one who leaves the deepest imprint. Invisible to the eyes, but unforgettable in the memory of the one who thought they had you figured out. At first, they pretend it's nothing. They convince themselves your silence is temporary, that soon you'll be back with one of those messages they already know how to ignore. They won't say it, but they think it. They'll text me tomorrow, they always come back. But not this time. This time you don't. This time you're gone, no reaction, no comment, no cryptic stories, just silence. And they don't know how to handle silence because it's not like a message you can ignore. Silence creeps in. It's felt even when the world is loud. Those who were used to always having you there won't realize they've lost you. Not immediately, but the moment will come. It always does. Usually in a quiet afternoon, scrolling their phone to distract themselves. That's when it hits them. You're no longer there. No sign, no presence, no trace that you're still waiting. And then their mind kicks in. It starts asking questions, inventing answers, imagining scenarios. The emptiness you leave behind isn't empty at all. It's a question with no answer, a doubt that stings. Silence is only a strategy if you're forcing it. But when it comes from a deeper need, it becomes power. Power that doesn't scream, doesn't beg, doesn't try to prove anything. But it slowly dismantles the other person's certainty. Because when you stop chasing someone who never truly chose you, you leave a hole in the script they had written for you. And that hole, they have no idea how to fill it. At first they think it's just a phase. They're waiting for my story to react. I'm sure they'll message me in a few days. They're just pretending. But the longer the silence lasts, the heavier it becomes. Because it's not random, it's consistent, it's solid. And above all, dears, it's indifferent. No complaints, no provocations, no signs, just distance. And the more distance grows, the more they start thinking of you. Not out of love, out of discomfort. The human brain is wired to fear the unknown. When it lacks answers, it makes them up. When it has no data, it invents stories. And the more invisible you become, the more present your image becomes in their mind. They wonder if you're hurt, if you've met someone else, if you finally woke up and realized you deserve more. And that uncertainty becomes a silent torment. At some point, they check their phone and expect to see your name. But it's not there. They open their stories hoping you've seen them. Nothing. They post a quote, a subtle message, a little bait, and you don't react. And every non-response hits their ego like a blow, because they can't predict you anymore. And when someone becomes unpredictable, they slip out of your control. That's when real respect is born. Not the romantic kind made of flowers and sweet words, but the raw, grounded kind. The kind that comes only when they realize you're no longer willing to stay silent just to be noticed. That you won't remain where you don't feel chosen. That you'd rather disappear with dignity than stay and beg for scraps of attention. And that changes everything. Your silence becomes a noise they can't mute. Every time they check their phone, they hope to see you. And every time you're not there, they ask themselves why. Your distance becomes a mirror. It reflects their negligence, their choices, their emotional laziness. And while they start overthinking, you're already rebuilding. Your absence begins to weigh exactly when they least expect it. Because you didn't disappear to punish, you disappeared to breathe. And only when they lose access to your presence do they understand how much it was worth. But by then, it's often too late. The emptiness you leave behind isn't visible. It makes no sound, it has no shape. But it has weight. It's like walking through a house where there used to be music and now there's only silence. At first it feels like peace, then it becomes unease, then longing, then regret. And finally the question, why aren't they coming back? And the answer is simple. Because someone who learns to be at peace alone no longer needs to be seen by those who never truly saw them. True detachment is quiet. It gives no warning. It makes no scene. You don't stop loving overnight, but you stop chasing the one who made you feel invisible. And when that happens, they notice, maybe not right away. Maybe they'll never say it out loud, but they feel it. Every time you don't show up, every time you don't respond, every time the silence lasts longer than they expected. The void you leave is not a punishment. It's a consequence of finally choosing yourself. And the paradox is, when you truly do that, the one who once ignored you begins to think about you more than ever. You're not who you used to be. And that's exactly what unsettles them. Because the version they knew, the one who adapted, waited, and reacted, is gone, and what's left is a void. But not a weak, sad, desperate void. A calm one, a solid one. A void that doesn't beg to be filled, but that fiercely protects its peace. That's where the real change begins. When you stop participating in the game that was draining you and start building a new identity. Not to prove anything to them, but to never lose yourself again. You stop texting first, not because you're holding back, but because you have nothing left to say to someone who already decided not to listen. You stop checking if they saw your story, if they liked your post, if they said something that might be about you. Not because you're above it, but because you're tired. Tired of assigning meaning to signals that mean nothing. Tired of chasing someone who never really met you halfway. One day you wake up and realize the problem was never them. It was the role you agreed to play. The always available one. The one who showed up. Who responded right away. Who always forgave. Who accepted every excuse. Who stayed, even when treated like a backup plan. And so, at some point, you remove yourself. Not out of anger, not out of pride, but out of clarity. Because what hurt the most wasn't their absence, it was the silent betrayal of yourself. And while you're changing, while you choose silence and begin to rebuild your space, they don't get it. At first, they think you're just putting on an act, that it's a phase, that eventually you'll come back. But days go by, and you don't. You send no signals. You don't react. And then a new thought begins to creep in. What if they've really changed? The game stops working. Because you're no longer on the field. You don't move by their rules. You don't respond to their cues. You're no longer the predictable character seeking validation, attention, or small gestures to overanalyze. You've become someone they can no longer read between the lines. You are silence, you are absence, you are conscious invisibility. And paradoxically, that invisibility makes you more present than ever. Every time they don't see you, they feel you. Every time you don't write, they wonder why. Every time you don't respond, they question whether you've truly set yourself free. But you're not doing this to manipulate. You're doing it because you finally understood the cost of staying where there is no reciprocity. And you're no longer willing to pay that price. The one they saw as weak now stands unbending. The one they assumed still clung is clearly cutting the final thread. The one they thought they could keep in limbo is now standing behind a closed door. But closed without rage, without vengeance, just closed. Respect isn't demanded. It's declared through absence, through calm, through silence. When you remember that your time matters, that your heart isn't something to be used and set aside, that your presence is not a gift they're entitled to, everything changes, not for them, for you. Do you remember who you were at the beginning? Always waiting, on edge, in constant tension, hoping for a sign that you hadn't been forgotten. And now look at you. Beginning to live without needing that approval, breathing without having to be noticed, rebuilding your dignity, not through words, but through distance. And that distance is pure power. Because those who leave quietly, who disappear without explanations, who turn inward not to wound but to heal, become unrecognizable. You're no longer the image they had of you. You've become something they can't decode. And humans fear what they can't control. When you stop chasing, the one who took you for granted starts to turn around, not because they finally understand, but because now they understand nothing. And what isn't understood and fascinates, unsettles, haunts. You've stepped out of the game. You're no longer playing to be noticed. You're no longer part of the performance of coldness and calculated reactions. You're now focused on yourself, on what you want, on who you've become. And those who can't recognize you, it's because they're still looking at you with old eyes, with the belief that you're still there, fragile, willing to do anything for a crumb of attention. But you're not. Now you walk differently. You speak less. You reveal less, but inside you there's a new kind of strength. Not the strength of someone who conquers others, but of someone who has finally stopped abandoning themselves. And the best part? You don't have to say a word. Real change needs no explanation. It's felt. It's seen. And those who lost you, they feel it. It always happens this way. When you stop chasing, when you truly stop, When you no longer react to anything, something begins to move, but not in you, in them. And it's a slow shift, quiet, subtle, creeping in. At first, it's just a doubt, then discomfort, then a sharp ache. Because the longer your silence lasts, the more your absence starts to take up space, not in the real world, but in their mind. That same mind that once dismissed you without a second thought is now filled with questions no one expected. What if they don't come back? What if this time it's real? What if they've truly forgotten me? These questions don't come from love. They come from panic, from emptiness, from the sudden loss of control over someone they assumed they'd always have. At first, your silence is dismissed as drama, a phase, an act. They're just being dramatic, they'll show up soon. But time goes on, and you don't show up. You don't drop hints. You don't send cryptic messages. You don't check their stories. You no longer haunt their feed like a lingering shadow. For someone who thrives on attention, that's the first emotional slap. Because those who were used to your availability, your presence even after being hurt, now find themselves searching for something they once took for granted. And that's when the real doubt creeps in. The one that gnaws at them. The one that gives no peace. Because your silence starts to weigh on them, not as revenge, but as a mirror. A mirror that reflects how little they gave, how deeply they failed, how badly they underestimated you. Can you picture it? They unlock their phone, almost without thinking, scrolling for your name in the notifications. Nothing. They check if you liked their post. Nothing. They share something hoping you'll react. Silence. And every time you don't show up, they think of you more. Because it's exactly when you're no longer there that your presence becomes overwhelming. Invisible, but everywhere. It's not love. It's ego. It's broken routine. It's the urge to reclaim power. But that power's gone, because you're no longer there. Not like before. Not with the same energy, the same fear, the same emotional dependency. Now you are an absence that can't be ignored. A distance that sends no signals, but leaves traces. The doubt grows as they search for clues that you might still be watching, still waiting, but they find nothing. And that empties them, confuses them, unbalances them. Because those who once manipulated others with silence don't know what to do when silence is handed back to them. And you're not playing games. You're not disappearing to get them back. You're simply done losing yourself for someone who never had the courage to truly choose you. And that hurts. Them. Because no one expects the one who once waited to no longer wait. Truth is, they don't think about you when you chase them. They think about you when you don't respond, when you don't react, when you don't try to be seen, when your calm is louder than any explanation, when your self-respect speaks louder than your past declarations of love. That's when the testing begins. They try to reach you indirectly. A quote that feels oddly specific, a nostalgic story, a like on something from the past. But you don't respond, you don't move, you don't flinch. And that throws them into crisis, because they don't know if you forgot them, moved on, or simply don't care anymore. And the hardest part for them is that they no longer have access to your truth. For the first time, they don't know what you're thinking. They don't know if you're hurting or healing, if you're still watching or already done. They know nothing. And that nothing now consumes them. Doubt is the first step toward regret. That's when they truly start to lose. Not when you left, but when they realize you're not coming back. Not to punish, but because you've finally found the strength to close the door, to let go, to choose your dignity over their return. Now you are the question they can't answer. The absence that speaks louder than your past presence. The whisper that keeps them up at night. What if I've lost them forever? But they'll never say it, never admit it, because to do so would mean facing everything they refused to see, and everything they never gave. Meanwhile, you're already elsewhere, living, rebuilding. Learning that anyone who made you question your worth doesn't deserve your certainty. That anyone who made you feel invisible now has to live with your true invisibility. The one that's not a temporary retreat, but a permanent decision. You look in the mirror, and for the first time in a long time, you're not trying to look strong. You are. but not in the way the world defines strength. Not with muscles or harsh words. You're strong because you're calm, because you no longer chase, because you chose to respect yourself, even when someone else didn't. That's the kind of awakening no one talks about. The quiet kind. The one without witnesses. The one that doesn't need to be posted or quoted. It's the awakening that comes after the final wound, but doesn't bring rage. It brings clarity. You no longer feel the need to prove anything. Not to them, not to anyone. You're done explaining, justifying, chasing someone just to get a glance, a reply, or a little attention. Tired of having to be enough. Now you just want to be yourself. And in a world where everyone's begging for validation, that in itself is a revolution. At first it's frightening, because the very solitude you used to avoid now walks straight toward you, looks you in the eyes, and asks you a single, unsettling question. What now? And without dramatic gestures or distractions, your answer is simple. You stay. You stay with yourself. You don't run, you don't numb the emptiness with new conversations or temporary fixes, and you don't fill the silence with distractions or mistakes disguised as relief. You stop. You breathe. You listen. And for the first time, you begin to rebuild. Not to impress anyone, not to appear stronger, but to ensure that you never collapse the same way again. This new version of you is not a performance. He's not a colder, tougher, more cynical man. He's simply someone who has stopped handing out pieces of his soul to people who never earned them. Someone who has realized that real respect begins the moment you stop begging for it. That love is not proven by insistence or by staying where you are unwanted, but by walking away with quiet clarity from places where you were never truly chosen. And while you evolve in silence, while you reconstruct your space and pour your energy back into yourself, she begins to feel something. Not enough to speak about it, not enough to admit it, but enough to feel the shift in her bones. She senses it in the silence that no longer breaks, in the absence that continues to echo, in the energy she no longer receives without understanding why. You are no longer there. Not in body, but in presence, in attention, in spirit. Your energy is no longer accessible. Your soul is no longer on offer. Now every morning you choose yourself again. You rise, you look into the mirror, and you no longer wait for a message to make you feel alive, because you've learned to breathe without external validation, to stand without applause, and to keep walking, even without a message that says, "I miss you," from someone who was never truly present in the first place. And that is where real power is born. You are reborn in silence while the world shouts. You are reborn in solitude while everyone else clings desperately to noise and company. You are reborn in discipline while most drown in confusion, because you are no longer the one who waits in hope, but the one who walks forward with resolve. You walk quietly, yes, but every step leaves a vibration behind. This new version of you does not seek revenge, does not demand apologies, does not parade his transformation for others to applaud, because true change does not need an audience to be valid. It lives quietly in your gaze, in your posture, in the calm way you occupy your own space now. It is no longer a display. It is a reality. You have discovered that real self-respect begins the moment you learn to say no. When you stop defending those who hurt you. When you close the door without noise and without leaving it cracked open for someone to wander back in, because cracked doors attract uncertain returns, and you've reached a point where you only accept presence that is full, honest, and reciprocal. Your life begins to shift, not in public, not in your social feed, but within your core. You train your body not to look good for others, but to prove to yourself that you are disciplined. You read not to kill time, but to feed your mind. You eat better, sleep deeper, think clearer, not to prove anything to anyone, but because now you know you can't control how others treat you, yet you can control what you allow into your life. And that alone is enough to change everything. You haven't become cold, you've become discerning. You haven't shut down, you've learned to protect what's sacred in you. You no longer hand everything to people who only ever gave you fragments. You no longer open your heart to those who left you outside the door without a second thought. Now you weigh, now you observe, now you choose. And this ability to choose, to discern without bitterness, is the foundation of your rebirth. The new you is invisible to those who only looked when they needed something, but to those who can truly see, you are crystal clear now. You no longer explain your choices. You are a presence that doesn't shout, but is felt. A calm that doesn't demand attention, but expands naturally. An absence that weighs more than 1,000 forced appearances ever did. And if one day she wonders where you went, she'll realize you didn't disappear. You were reborn. You are no longer available. Not because you think you're better than anyone, but because for the first time, you finally believe you are enough. And someone who believes they are enough no longer sells themselves for less. Now you are the mystery. You are the silence that lingers. You are the one who no longer seeks those who never truly sought you. And if they ever come back, they will find a new face, a different energy, a version of you that demands nothing, and for that very reason is the most powerful of all. That moment always comes, no matter how far they drifted, no matter how well they faked indifference, no matter how many of your messages they ignored. That moment comes, sometimes after days, sometimes after months, sometimes when you've long stopped believing you'd ever hear from them again. But still, it happens. They return. But they don't return for love. They come back driven by instinct, by ego, by that voice inside that starts screaming when they can no longer find you where they always assumed you'd be. They return because something inside them breaks the moment they realize you're no longer waiting. You're no longer suffering in silence. You're no longer there. And the most painful part for them is not your absence. It's the awareness that you are doing absolutely nothing to be noticed, that you are not reaching out, that you are not looking for anyone, that your silence is no longer a tactic, but a way of life, that your detachment is no longer a response, but a choice. And that's when the signals begin. They write to you with vague excuses. They like your posts after weeks of silence. They appear by chance in your spaces. They send a random message with no context, just to see if you'll react. But you don't. And not because you want to make them suffer. You don't react because you're no longer the same. You're elsewhere, internally, externally, entirely, in every place but the one they left you in. Yes, they come back, but they don't find anyone there anymore because the person they lost is not the one you've become. And when they go searching for the old version of you, the one who would have replied immediately, the one who would have read every little sign as a lifeline, the one who would have clung to a message like it meant everything, what they find is silence, calm, a still presence. And that right there is their defeat. Their return is not your reward. It's just proof that your silence worked, that your disappearance left a void, that your absence made more noise than any grand gesture ever could. But you're no longer interested in that kind of validation because now you understand true respect is not measured by who comes back. It's measured by who never leaves, so you remain quiet, you don't reply. Or maybe you do, but with no warmth, no hope, no trace of that open door you once left for them. Because coming back is not enough. They must earn it now. And you weigh everything. The words, the actions, the silence they gave you, the answers that never came. Your memory is not made of resentment, it's made of dignity, of awareness, of respect for the wounds you've already healed on your own. They didn't expect this. They thought a single sign would bring you back. One message would reignite it all. One appearance would make you give in. But that's not how it works anymore. Not now. Because those who rebuild themselves in silence, those who go through pain without shortcuts, those who face loneliness all the way through, become untouchable. So while they look for cracks, you're building walls, not to shut the world out, but to protect yourself. Because now you know what it means to fall because you were too available. You know the emptiness that comes after giving everything, and you never want to go back there, not again. They observe you, and they don't understand. Why aren't they reacting? Why aren't they responding like before? Why do they seem so distant? The answer is simple, because now you're awake, not naive anymore, because you've paid the price of your own innocence. And now you no longer buy cheap words. You want actions, presence, consistency. And if they don't come, you don't move. If they look for you, let them see what you've become. If they return, let them find a wall of peace, a calm they can't touch, a silence that isn't offended but whole. Because true power isn't in ignoring. It's in no longer needing anything to be said. And there is no greater revenge than this. Being unreachable not because you're playing hard to get, but because you're truly no longer accessible, because you've grown. And someone who has grown never goes back to the place where they learned to suffer. Now the game has reversed. You don't chase anymore. You don't beg anymore. You're no longer playing the role of someone who sells themselves for scraps of affection. And when they come back, they return out of nostalgia for control, not out of love. And you, who now know the difference, choose to remain exactly where you are, in peace, in silence, invisible, but fully alive. One day it might happen. You cross paths with that person again, maybe on the street, maybe in a place you didn't expect, maybe through a sudden message. And that's the real moment. But not in the way you once imagined, not with a movie scene, not with a look full of regret, not with heartfelt words or tears to make up for the silence. No, in reality, it all happens much colder. And you are no longer the same. Your heart doesn't race like it used to. You're not waiting for anything. You're not hoping for some grand explanation. You're no longer craving the confirmation you once searched for everywhere. Now you're simply there, present, calm, real, but distant. Not out of bitterness, out of dignity. And she feels it. She senses it in the way you don't let her touch you, in the way you don't seek, don't react, don't try to appear better than you are. You're simply yourself. And that version of you, she no longer recognizes. You're no longer need disguised as love. You're no longer availability masked as empathy. You've become selective presence, energy that is no longer for sale, balance that doesn't bend. And when she looks into your eyes, she knows there is no longer space for her in your life, not because you hate her, but because you've finally filled yourself. And where there is fullness, there is no need to chase what couldn't stay. This is not revenge, it's not an act, it's a silent closure, an invisible one that doesn't need words to be heard. Say it's a goodbye without yelling, without explanation, without rage. It's your way of saying enough, without needing to say anything at all. It is the most powerful way a human being can end something, with the unshakable calm of someone who has finally made peace with themselves. Maybe she smiles. Maybe she tries to provoke a reaction. Maybe she presses on an emotional point, thinking you'll cave. But it doesn't work, because your calm isn't a mask. It's an achievement. There is no longer that emptiness she used to crawl into. There is no longer that door left ajar. There is no longer even that part of you that wanted to be seen. Now, you see yourself. And that is something she can no longer control. What unsettles her is not your indifference, it's your neutrality. It's the fact that you show no anger, but also no warmth, that you don't seem hurt, yet not nostalgic either, that you make no attempt to rebuild what once was, because within you, everything is already rebuilt. And she, who believed she could return whenever she pleased, now finds herself standing before a wall she doesn't know how to break down. A wall not built of resentment, but of peace. She looks at you. She watches. But she can no longer read you. And that is her punishment. Not one you inflicted, but one born of her own choices. Because real karma isn't watching someone suffer. It's realizing you can no longer enter a place you once had full access to. It's the recognition that something was lost, and none of your old tactics work anymore. You don't try to look happy. You are. You don't flaunt anything, and you don't need to prove anything. Your mere existence, peaceful, distant, whole, is enough to make her understand that she will never return to the place she once held in your life. Not because you're cruel, but because you've changed. And when someone truly changes, they never go back. Your invisibility now is not absence, it is protection. It is discernment. It is the highest form of self-love. It's not that you feel nothing. It's that not everything deserves a reaction. Not everything deserves a second chance. Not everything deserves a place in the new life you're building. You walked through darkness. You faced the harshest silence. You accepted loneliness. You resisted the temptation to reach out, to explain, to chase. And from all of that, you emerged, transformed. And now, right now, as she looks at you through different eyes, she realizes that you've become unreachable. Not because you disappeared, but because you've risen. Your closure is not a slammed door. It's a door that no longer opens, not because it's locked, but because you, on the other side, are no longer there. Now you belong to a different space, to a version of yourself that no longer dwells in old places. Now you are light that no longer seeks shadow. Now you are calm that no longer lowers itself to the level of chaos. Now, you are inaccessible. And if these words resonate with you, if you finally understood that real silence is the one that protects you, write it in the comments below. Now my silence is inaccessible. Because those who become inaccessible to those who took them for granted are never forgotten.